And welcome back. And we are moving into our second conversation for today as we tie together for you human rights and the HIV response. We have with us on set this morning Leo Bradley, who is the Vice Chair of the National AIDS Commission, and Leslie Mendez, who is the Legal Advisor for the Human Rights Observatory for UNIBAM. Good morning and welcome, and thank you for being here.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
So, it seems so easy to tie together the issue of human rights and looking at persons living with HIV or persons affected by HIV. But let's just start off hearing it from your perspective. And I'll have Leo start off as a representative of NAC.
Okay, thank you very much, Marlene. The National AIDS Commission has been working tirelessly to try to educate, inform, sensitize the general public. And we take this opportunity, and thank you all for giving us this opportunity to reach out to persons. One of the immediate responses, or one of the needs that we saw, was the setting up of observatories. This is where individuals can contact legally trained individuals so as to assist them with whatever discrimination, whatever kind of slight they may encounter in that road of trying to treat HIV/AIDS. Two observatories have been set up, one with the UNIBAM and the other with the Human Rights Commission of Belize. People may know the Human Rights Commission of Belize is centered in Belmopan. Our offices are located at 1 Slim Lane in Belmopan, and so we are hoping that persons in that side of the country, the west, the south of the country, whomever have problems will reach out to the observatory in order to try to get assistance in whatever kind of difficulties they may encounter.
And Leslie, tell us a bit about your role as legal advisor for the Human Rights Observatory for UNIBAM.
Yes, well, my role as legal advisor really entails setting up clinics so that I make myself available to members of the community that may be encountering some difficulty that may be addressed through legal means, whether it be by just writing a letter, whether it be by general assistance as to how to navigate the courts, how to navigate certain departments, how to interpret certain laws as well. So I do the clinics. We hold also seminars. We've held some seminars, some workshops. And for the most part, it's really for now, it's to establish a relationship with the community so that the members of the community can feel comfortable in approaching me and coming to me with whatever legal issue that they may be facing, particularly when it comes to discrimination. So that my work has so far entailed assisting persons navigating through the police departments, the police stations, as well as just advising them on a one-on-one basis.
Is this pro bono?
No, I am retained.
Okay.
I am retained. It's funded by the Global Fund through UNDP as well, so I'm retained.
Okay.
I get something.
And what's the reception been like from members of the community?
Well, it's growing, you know. I started off mid-year, 2016, and it's growing. People are getting to know me more, because it's also because it's such an issue of intimacy. People want to be comfortable with who they're coming to, with their issues. They don't want to expose themselves to go to somebody that would then again discriminate or treat them in an unfavorable manner. So it's growing. We are getting more and more participation. It's not as much as we would like. We really would like to invite more members of the community, and I guess that is part of why we're here. To again remind members of the community that I am here, because I have been on several media appearances. And to remind them that I am here. And now Mr. Bradley is here, and Mr. Earl Jones will now be part of the
I just wanted to speak a bit about our role thus far. As Leslie said, she started out in mid-2016, and the Human Rights Commission came on 2 or 3 months later in the representation of Michelle Trapp. Michelle Trapp did an awesome job in starting to do exactly what Leslie has been doing here in Belize City.
Yeah.
She has been moving around the country. I know she had sessions in Dangriga, and I believe she went further south as well. And she has also been dealing with persons on a myriad of issues. Leslie mentioned a few, but there are also concerns within the community. For example, dealing with family, dealing with matters that go before the family court, maintenance for children. You also have the issue as with regards to wills,
Yes.
probate, what happens when you die and you have a partner who
Yeah,
isn't.
we've heard some horrible stories. Yeah.
So it's those are the sort of issues that she had encountered.
Yeah.
As we all know, she has been elevated to magistracy. She's now a magistrate. And since she has moved out, we have brought in Earl Jones. Mr. Jones brings a lot of experience, having been a magistrate himself, and he was also CEO at the prison. So he knows what kinds of problems there are there, because this issue touches inmates as well as persons outside, etc. So we look forward to having Earl Jones on board. And like I said, I already gave our address, which is
Yeah.
1 Slim Lane, but I should add our telephone number, which is 605-1188. And Mr. Jones should have that phone, and I believe the way he's going to be operating is that he will speak to people, make appointments, and they can come in. And like I said, he would be centered in Belmopan. For those who don't know where 1 Slim Lane is, it is immediately in front of the police training academy in Belmopan, and we're housed in a building called Help for Progress. Help for Progress is another NGO that deals with immigration.
Yeah.
With persons with immigration matters. So we find ourselves as NGOs partnering and assisting one another.
When it comes to recognizing when your human rights have been infringed upon, not everyone is sensitized enough to be able to understand. Sometimes they just have a feeling that we've been wronged in some way, but we don't know if we're being too sensitive or if they're actual rights or laws being broken. How do we educate people to understand when they should access the Human Rights Commission, the Observatory, or any particular authority that can assist them?
Well, that is why it's so important to hold the workshops. We also held a conference last year in which I participated to educate members of the community. And really, it's not only LGBTI, we also incorporate other NGOs that are also working. For instance, we are working as well with sex workers for now. So it's not only LGBTI, and I think that is why the education programs or the education efforts are so important, because it is true. I think that certain violations are not as egregious as some, and so are kind of just put on the wayside, or are just left as is because it's normalized to some extent. So that's why it is indeed very important that you go through that education. And also to have these point persons that you can access. So for instance, if it is that you're not a member of the LGBTI community, or if it is that you are, but Mr. Earl Jones is more accessible to you, we are also coordinating efforts here. So I'm sure that Mr. Earl Jones would then contact me to say, Leslie, this is the situation here, can you assist? And that is where we come in. So it really is collaboration, and yes, education is definitely important.
I wanted to elaborate just a bit more, Lenny, because the Human Rights Commission per se has in fact attempted to educate, to inform, to sensitize people, and we have done this through very specific areas. For example, we have assisted the police in the training of new recruits. We have done training at the prison department in terms of prison officers and how they should be treating inmates, etc. But you are quite right that the individual may not always be sensitized as to when in fact their human rights have been infringed upon, or whether or not they have a complaint, etc. I always say to people, you treat people the way how you want to be treated. So if you find that you have been treated in a way, sometimes we're a bit oversensitive, but sometimes we truly have been have our rights infringed upon. I find, or we're hoping that the Human Rights Commission can go in the way of, like I said, I spoke about the prison and about the police, but I think we also need in our health services, and we also need in our public service, for our public service to realize that you're dealing with the community, you're dealing with human beings, treat them the way how you would want to be treated. I mean, we go to Not to go into it too much, but we do have areas in which our human rights are violated from time to time, and it's just a matter of sensitizing ourselves or educating ourselves. And now we have avenues, especially when it comes with persons with HIV/AIDS.
Yeah, yeah. And we know that oftentimes we speak specifically of men who have sex with men as being one of the vulnerable populations for HIV. Let's talk about some of the cases or some of the issues that you regularly see in the response to HIV. Perhaps it's accessing health care, perhaps it's discrimination based on status. What are some of the actual human rights infringements you are seeing for whether it's HIV positive people or members of the LGBT community?
This is more a question for Leslie, but I just wanted to begin because I just finished having a conversation with Michelle Trapp on her experiences.
Yeah.
And one of the things that she found was, for example, children who are HIV positive and have to deal with schools.
Yes.
And schools, and where does the line of privacy end, and where does the rights of other individuals begin? That is one area. You have other areas, for example, in job discrimination, where persons have been discriminated against because of their status. And you also have landlord and tenant issues, where the landlord finds out that the tenant is infected and immediately want to put them out. Their rights are being infringed. But Leslie would have more hands-on.
Yes, certainly. I think that the area of employment is one of the sections really that persons living with HIV have some difficulty, especially when it comes to respecting their privacy. So for instance, we have a major question that we have to contend with is whether we want to endorse mandatory testing, for instance. So that's an issue of privacy that a lot of the persons, or a number of the persons living with HIV, have communicated to me. Access to medical services is also another one. Sometimes it does involve the availability of the medication, the availability of the services, the accessibility of it. Some people live in rural areas and it's not as easily accessible to them. So those are some of the issues that I'm encountering with respect to persons living with HIV.
Let me ask a question. Legally, can an institution request your HIV status for a job?
No. No, it shouldn't. In terms of international human rights, that is considered to be an infringement of your right to privacy. You have to show that there needs to be a link with the type of employment that you have as to the relevance that it would have to the relevance and the utility of it. So you can't just because of your own personal curiosity want to know. There has to be a link, and there has to be a situation where, well, we need to know, because if we don't know, we are putting other people at risk, for instance.
We've also seen it with scholarship applications as well in some cases.
Yes, there's no relevance to that. That is an infringement.
But of course, the difference is if I opt not to, I may lessen my chances of gaining that employment or being eligible for the scholarship.
Yes, and that is why reform of the protections that we offer to persons living as in legislative reform is so necessary. For instance, there has been a recommendation from, at the moment I don't remember, it was a legal advisor that came and reviewed our legal provisions and the extent to which we are protecting persons living with HIV. And there was a recommendation as well for insurance companies to also not be allowed to exclude persons living with HIV, particularly those that have been born with HIV. So there is room for improvement. There's a lot of room for improvement with respect to the legislative protections that we offer them.
And could you elaborate on what the process is like accessing the Human Rights Observatory?
Well, at the workshops, Caleb has also, through the Facebook page, through the website, it's really Unabom that does the work to put out my contact details. So
Yeah.
right now, you can just call Marine Parade Chambers because that's where I'm based. Marine Parade Chambers, my office number, and my assistants there would put me on through. So it's really, because I'm part-time, I'm not based at the office. Like for instance, with the Human Rights Commission, we don't have an office.
Yeah.
So really, it's a personal contact. Somebody that has been working in LGBTI. It's not, to be quite honest, it's not even only Unibom. I also work with Dericia Castillo, that is in charge of our circle. So she has also been making contact with me and referring persons to me, and I have also held clinics with her, or with our circle, really. So it's a personal contact, so here we are, and those are my contact details.
And just a couple of things I wanted to add in. One is that it's pretty much the same with, it's an observatory, meaning that they observe, and so it's part-time, as Leslie mentioned, and which is why I mentioned the phone number, so in case anybody wanted to contact Earl Jones. But I do know in the past that Michelle Trapp was dealing with specific organizations, I believe POWA and with CNET, and again, through those organizations, we have the outreach for persons requiring the services. I also wanted to mention when you had spoken with regards to the National AIDS Commission, just to add in a bit more about the national testing. The National AIDS Commission on its own has reached out. You all know about the Scotiabank Testing Day, but we have won regional awards, or the NAC has gotten regional awards, recognition regionally, I should say, because we have reached out to workplaces where we have actually gone and done testing on site with BEL, other places that have large population of workers. So
Male workers,
male workers. That's one thing. Another thing that we do is we, as a part of the National AIDS Commission, we are also working with, for example, the Ministry of Health, and with their unit that deals specifically with this, so as to try to correct some of the situations that Leslie has been saying that they have been encountering with regards to prescription drugs, etc., the pharmaceutical side of it.
You know, at one of the workshops that we have had, person there that was living with HIV, who I thought was very brave, by the way, because it wasn't only for NAC, it was a cross-section of persons, and they were very straightforward and forthcoming about their status. And they mentioned that there are measures that are taken that you don't even realize how it affects persons' rights. So for instance, they mentioned that at the hospital, I don't know if that's still the position, but before, they would have Fridays, or they would have a specific day set out for the doctor that comes in to treat persons with HIV. So on Friday, all persons living with HIV would go and access, and everybody would know that. So essentially, everybody that would know that Fridays,
Infringement of privacy.
exactly, everybody that would know that Fridays, this is when the doctor comes, so the person's waiting out there, our person's living, you would very easily conclude, So they were just not necessarily complaining, but just highlighting the fact that you don't even realize that on the one hand, you're trying to help because you're trying for persons living with HIV to establish a relationship with their medical consultant, and so these persons had established a relationship with this doctor, but also at the same time, it also infringes their privacy
And that's
and
why there sometimes
confidentiality.
is such a delicate balance. You know, I'll give you one example for women with HIV can have babies that don't have HIV. We can't say it enough. People can know that if the woman adheres to her treatment, takes care of her body, and doesn't breastfeed, you know. But what happens when a woman who knows her status doesn't do all that is necessary to prevent HIV transmission to the child or to the partner who impregnates her?
I was about to say before you started saying that it is important for people to understand and to realize that we're no longer living 30 years ago where living with HIV/AIDS was a death sentence.
Yes.
We are not living in that era. We are living in an era where you can live for decades.
It's like a chronic condition.
And you just need to take your medication. You need to do your treatment. You need to live a healthy lifestyle. And you could live for very long. And male, female, whomever it is. And you're quite right, Marlene, that in terms of education, I think, is what it is in order for, in terms of women, because you specifically highlighted women, in terms of getting them to understand, take your medication, etc. You can have children, etc. if you take care of yourself and of your child.
Now, I can only imagine when you talk about stigma and discrimination specifically, there's so many cases. If you're talking about the population that you work with UNIBAM and our circle, and of course with persons who have HIV and AIDS, or even just family members of persons who have HIV and AIDS. And there seems to be sometimes, I think, a misconception in Belize that we can openly say how we feel about things and persons. About persons. And we have seen, especially I know through the work that we do, some of the vile comments and threats that people make. Talk to us about the human rights aspect in that and what it does in terms of having us overcome the stigma and discrimination that can lead to other problems.
It's funny, I'm kind of smirking because I'm thinking how the law tends to overlap.
Why? Do you do these Facebook comments?
No, cyberbullying. Cyberbullying
Yeah.
and how it comes into play. And another area in the law in which we need legislative,
It's hate
we
speech.
need legislative
It's-
change
Yeah.
or we need to update. A part of the National AIDS Commission, by the way, we do have sitting on there representative from the Solicitor General.
Yeah.
So, of course, though, the load is tremendous, the amount of legislative reform we require in this country.
Yeah.
But it is something that we are addressing, at least from that aspect.
Yes, and I must say that the AG's office, or at least the contacts that we've had so far, facilitated by UNIBAM, that is, they have been very open to coming to the table with us and speaking about certain legislative reforms, including hate speech, which I think is what would fall under that. We do have a right, of course, and I think that it's something worth to be protected, which is the right of free speech,
Yes.
freedom of expression. But of course, it has its limits, in the same way that defamation is a limit.
Yeah.
You cannot defame somebody.
Yeah.
You are also not supposed to be allowed to disseminate hate speech and to be putting persons in fear of their life. And that
Yeah.
happens so much on Facebook, but it also happens at the nightclubs.
Yeah.
It happens a lot at the nightclubs, and I always think to myself, how would a homosexual man feel in there when everybody is, mimicking gunshots,
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's something that needs to be addressed for sure.
Have you had any cases where perhaps someone comes to you and says, there's a comment on Facebook that says, I would kill maybe an individual person or a person who identifies as a homosexual, and say, I want to bring it, because it's a threat, it's a death threat.
Absolutely. But
Yeah.
let me tell you something. I have never had anybody come and complain to me about that. And that is not, to me, that is alarming,
Yeah.
that is worrisome, because of the same thing that you started off with, Miss Marlene, is the fact that not all of us know what our rights are, and particularly members of vulnerable groups feel that it's something they have to tolerate, not make too much noise about it. And so I myself have seen the threats online, and I am sure that it's even worse in their private messages. But nobody has ever come to me and say, Leslie, this is something I really want you to address. It's not something that they come to me because it's normalized. It's something that they feel they need to tolerate. So in that sense, education is so important. Empowerment is so important for them to say, no, this is not something you need to tolerate. You need to go and make a complaint. Now, this is not to say that complaints haven't been made, but I'm speaking from me personally as the legal counsel to UNIBAM. Nobody has come to me and say, I want to do something about this.
Yeah. I hear what you say with it being worrisome, because it's almost, it's saying that we have accepted that this is status quo, that people will speak ill and make threats, and it is simply a part of the lifestyle that you the life that you have.
And I think there's also fear in reporting it, and then the person finds out, and then there's fear that it blows up into something worse. You know, yeah.
Yeah, reprisals for sure. And also, it's not easy as a member of the LGBTI community, particularly men, homosexual men, to go to the police stations.
No.
You know, I think that that's something that we need to address. It's hyper masculine, and so it's not the easiest experience, and I can tell because I've seen it.
Yeah.
It really isn't.
And we've heard of cases of domestic violence. In fact, we did have one case at least that has gone through the courts. And that is such a great point, because I also wanted to talk about how this is linked with the Ombudsman's office. The Ombudsman obviously has a role when it comes to being able to ensure that human rights are upheld for all Belizeans. So what are the links between the Observatory, the Human Rights Commission, with the Ombudsman?
Well, if I can start.
No, go ahead.
Yeah.
The Human Rights Commission has worked closely with the Ombudsman Office. I would certainly advise persons, number one, that if anybody makes a threat against them or makes to file a complaint immediately. As Leslie pointed out, the police may not be receptive, but certainly that would be the office that I would point them to the office of the Ombudsman, to have it recorded.
Yeah.
Because a threat against an individual is a very serious thing.
Yeah.
You don't want something to happen to you later on and it's not recorded somewhere,
Yeah.
that somebody else had made a threat against you. So certainly I would recommend to anyone who is threatened, if they don't feel comfortable going to the police station, go to the Ombudsman's office. That is your next viable option.
Okay.
No, certainly.
Yeah. And
No,
then
for sure. With respect to our relationship with the Ombudsman's office, we have had a couple meetings, and at this point in time, it's really trying to establish a working relationship with the Ombudsman's office. Also, to try to come up with, well, at least from Unabom's perspective, it's not something that has been as yet sanctioned by the Office of the Ombudsperson by any means. So I don't want to say it's already established or anything like that. But we would like to come up with certain guidelines and also hold certain workshops on how to deal with cases of discrimination. You know, I also think that there is some work to be done by the Ombudsman's office to strengthen their efforts in how they deal with cases of discrimination and being able to identify, yes, that was discrimination, and this is something that needs to be addressed.
You know, similarly with the case of cyberbullying, we've seen, or we've heard of cases, I should say, of even persons disclosing a person's status when it comes to HIV, or speculating on a person's status. Talk to us about what some of the guidelines are there.
Well, we've had one incident in which it happened in our health services, and that is worrisome. Because one would want to hope that one can access health services without having exactly what you're being
That's
outed.
a common complaint. Let me just interject. I just wanted to mention that's a common complaint. When we were doing the workshop with persons living with HIV, that was a common complaint of some way, somehow, they can't tell you who, but they realize, okay, someone out here knows my status. And the only person that I've told is one person and the people at the hospital.
Yeah.
So that is a serious breach of confidence that I think that should be, the medical facilities should have established a procedure for being able to make a complaint and being able to see it through. Not everything has to be justiciable in a court, but certainly if I think that the medical services have a responsibility to uphold their professional duty with respect to confidentiality, for persons to be able to come and make the complaint and them deal with it. No?
Absolutely, I agree with you. And again, it comes down to training. But we have such a large health system stemming from one end of the country to the next. It's difficult.
And
we're a
it's the
small
amount of
country.
people who come in contact, and you know, your lab tech may not necessarily disclose your results, but it could be a receptionist or somebody who is a security who sees you come in and perhaps makes an assumption. What about the people who make, and that's what I'm saying, if we can't be able to talk about what happens within the healthcare system, what about those who make the public proclamations? X, Y, and Z HIV positive, or I will hurt this person because they're gay.
That's a threat.
Yeah.
That's a threat.
Yeah.
You can certainly make that complaint if you are threatening physical harm against someone, for sure. But certainly I think that the issue of disclosing somebody's HIV status, particularly when it's true, should be addressed. There should be mechanisms for that person to be able to find redress. I say that because if it's not true, that's defamation.
Yeah.
And so that's already covered at least by one area in the law. But if it is true, I think that you certainly should be able to have some sort of redress, because that puts you at risk. Not everybody is as tolerant.
Yeah.
And I think they should be able to have some sort of redress.
So let's broaden the conversation to talking about the idea of the concept of tolerance, the acceptance of human rights. I think we still have a long way to go to be able to understand just why we possess these rights, and that it is not unique to any one individual, that it is across the board. What is the explanation? By virtue of being a human being,
Inherent.
then you are entrusted with these rights, and the rights come with the responsibilities of respecting other people's rights.
I think it begins at home. I think it begins with our teaching our children how to accept to be treated, as well as to treat other individuals in the way one wants to be treated. And then, of course, that extends into our educational system, and by extension into our job places, etc. But I think that there certainly is a need for education and for people to be cognizant of their rights. Don't you agree, Leslie?
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. But I also think that it comes with the state imposing some consequences for the breach, without necessarily always having to go to court.
Yeah.
So that if an individual, whether you know him or not, makes a complaint that this person, this public officer, called me
Whatever.
the B word, right? I don't know if we can say that.
Yeah.
But said that to me. That there be some consequence, that they be taken serious, and that person to whom the complaint was made be follow it through. Or if that person is not the person to follow it through, then refer the person making the complaint to the person in charge. Who can I make this complaint to? And I find that there's a lot of times people make complaints about humiliating behavior that was imposed on them, that with the specific purpose to humiliate them, to discriminate them in front of a lot of people in the public service. And there's no follow through when people make a complaint. And then they get upset when you end up in the media and make the complaint. But when persons try to make it on a private, to deal with it in an internal manner, nothing was done. Why it's not done? Because they don't understand, and I think that it's something that needs to be emphasized, that they have an obligation to follow through on a complaint and tell the person that has made the complaint the result of your investigation, of whatever efforts you have done to address the situation.
The one thing that pops in my mind when you say that is when a young woman's naked image is shared. Because what do you do in a case like that? There aren't really any laws to protect you, or to punish the person that's done it to you. So what do you do in a scenario like that?
Well, of course, you report it to Facebook now.
Yeah.
But I do think that the cyberbullying, I do think that there are some efforts being made to address the issue of cyberbullying. I think that the state that we are in right now, I think it's more an obligation on us to not continue sharing the image. If it's not the image of the person, then at the moment it could be justiciable. But for the most part, I think that comes in with education and fighting against what we consider to be slut shaming.
Yeah.
But I think that if you know who has shared your picture, you certainly have redress in the courts.
Okay.
Where
You
it
should.
where it hurts, where it's financially.
Yeah.
To get
Yes.
financial compensation, suing in court if you know who it is
Yeah.
that has shared.
And there's a lot of shaming I think people have, or there's a lot of fear of shame that people have in being able to address these situations. I want to flip it over to something else, because I think sometimes people don't address the nude photos because they feel that they've been complicit, and they feel horrible about doing it, and none of that is an excuse. Nobody had the right to share the photo. You should do something about it. But there is a societal problem or perceptions that really feed into whether or not people take action. And I want to use that as an example as to what we've seen in the most recent case of alleged sexual assault. When we have cases of young girls, let's use that as an example, being violated in any way, there's a sensitivity, oftentimes, not always, from the public about what has been done to the young girl. In this particular case, where it was an adult male and a male minor, the response from the public was more comedic. And I have to ask you, as human rights professionals, what is the core of this issue from your perspective as to why we cannot be able to recognize that wrong is wrong, no matter what sex is involved?
Well, the response has certainly been very disappointing. For me, I think that there is a focus, an unnecessary focus on the homosexual nature of it. Sexual abuse is abuse, but for some reason we are responding more based on our society's homophobia and response to ridiculing homosexuals. So right now the focus is on the fact, not that he's an aggressor, but that he committed abuse of a homosexual nature, or at least that's the allegation. No? And I think that it's a call on us. It's a call on us, on society. It's a call on everybody, whether it's the NGO, whether it's state departments, to ask themselves, where are we with respect to children protection?
Yes.
I think that there's a lot of times where we speak about children's rights and protecting them against sexual abuse, and I think that we are all on the same page when it comes to, we have no tolerance of those things. But now here we are in this situation where it's completely a circus. It's an absolute circus about this. You have all of these memes, people getting creative with songs, and it's, to be quite honest, it's quite repulsive. It's quite repulsive, and I would really call on anybody with some sense of decency to not be sharing them. Whether it be, oh, I just shared it for my kissy. No, don't share it. This is not funny. It's absolutely not funny. There's a there's a serious concern about exploitation here.
And it really brings to light the deeper societal issues that we have in terms of, you called it homophobia, and I think, because I'm seeing this issue twofold. There is the homophobic aspect, but there is also the minor is a child at 16, but we don't really see them as a child if they make a decision, and it's almost a bit of a schizophrenia. If I have a 16-year-old in my family, he's a child, whether he wants to believe it or not. He's a child.
It's an anomaly in our law.
Yes.
It's an anomaly in our law that needs to be corrected.
Yes.
You have what is 16, what is 18, what are your rights as a 16-year-old, as an 18-year-old, and it needs to be changed. It needs to be addressed. Those are the concerns that we should highlight, or that we should focus on when dealing with a situation like this, an incident like this that has occurred. How do we change? How do we correct things that are inappropriate? How do we correct laws that are anomalies, and move forward?
If at 16 you aren't able to vote, then
Or drink.
Then why is it that at 16 you're able to consent?
And again, I don't want to lose the opportunity to highlight just the general sense of homophobia that we do have, and how, as much as people make fun, they also make very, very threatening comments as well, and I think that is of concern. I would say that we are living in a society where as much as we are aware that human rights exist, we don't understand our particular role in being able to execute and to have more of a human rights approach in our own interactions. How do we bridge that gap? How do we go from saying, yes, yes, everybody have human rights, to really understanding I have a role in being able to ensure my rights are maintained and the rights of others to be maintained? How do we get to that common space?
Well, for sure, I would repeat Mr. Bradley's response to that it starts in the home.
Yeah.
It starts with basic respect. And then it also, I think, has to be addressed that human rights is not only a legal conversation, it's not a technical conversation. It's absolutely very relevant to the way that we behave. What do we think? How much do we tolerate others' differences? How much respect do we give people? How much empathy do we have?
Very important word, empathy.
And I just wanted to mention something again about the situation that you mentioned it, with the most recent case of sexual abuse. I think that when the case was happening, when Caleb's case was happening, a lot of the churches, a lot of the more interested groups in this society that had some concerns about it. Their concern was mainly about the children. But here now we have a situation where there is a male child that needs to be protected. Their privacy needs to be respected. And where are we?
Where are we?
Where are we? How much are we respecting this child's privacy as opposed to making him collateral damage in your attempt or your desire to ridicule this man?
Valid point.
I don't know if you wanted to.
No, I agree completely. I agree
Yeah.
completely.
Yeah.
Because silence is complicity.
Yeah. And if we go back to what you mentioned earlier, if you're a parent and you have children, you are exemplifying the type of behavior that they will most likely adopt. So
You're
if
late.
you see your father, your mother making fun of a child being abused, then that's what's being taught
That's
to
what's
children
being
as
taught.
well.
Exactly.
So hopefully people can make the connection. But let's bring it back to a lighter note, or a more positive note, I should say, that there are opportunities for people who feel that they've been wronged in any way to be able to access legal advice through the Observatory. So remind us about that and how to get in touch as well.
The Observatory at the Human Rights Commission is located at 1 Slim Lane in Belmopan. The number is 605-1188. The person running the place is Earl Jones. Certainly we have a Facebook page. The Human Rights Commission of Belize has a Facebook page as well as a web page. And so those are the ways of contacting the Human Rights Commission and our Observatory. And Leslie?
And Leslie,
Well,
you can be
Leslie-
contacted through Unibam, you said.
Through Unibom
Okay.
or directly to my office at Marine Parade Chambers, phone number 223-3045.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to go ahead now and take a break, and when we come back, we'll be finding out more about the latest promotions from Digicel, so stay tuned.